The ballroom shimmered under a chandelier made of crystal and pride. Gold champagne flutes clinked. Laughter echoed like music scripted for the rich. It was the kind of evening where people smiled too perfectly, and secrets wore perfume. At the center of it all stood Alexander Ward, the billionaire everyone admired but few really knew. He was the man who had turned a struggling tech company into a global empire before he was 35. Tonight's gala wasn't about money. It was about image. His fiancée, Victoria Hale, had planned the event down to the last diamond-encrusted detail. Every journalist, investor, and socialite worth knowing was there to celebrate their upcoming wedding. But amidst the glitter, one person didn't belong. She stood near the catering table, Amara Jones, a 27-year-old waitress, wearing a crisp white shirt and a tired smile. Her dark curls were tucked neatly under her cap, her brown eyes alert and kind. She'd been called in last minute by an agency to fill in for someone sick. She wasn't supposed to talk to guests. Just serve, smile, and vanish into the background. Yet destiny has a strange way of making background characters the center of the story. The whisper Amara noticed him before he noticed her. Alexander Ward, tall, calm, impossibly composed. But up close he looked tired. There was something human in his eyes that photos never captured. He leaned against the bar, holding a glass of champagne, his fiancée's laughter ringing behind him. Victoria was beautiful in the kind of way that could silence a room, but Amara had seen that beauty before, cold, sharp, practiced, the kind that sparkled only under the right lighting. As Amara carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres past them, she caught a glimpse that made her pause. A slim hand, Victoria's, slipped something small and glinting into Alexander's drink when he turned away to greet a guest. It was quick, almost invisible, but not invisible enough. Amara's stomach dropped. At first, she doubted herself. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was just a reflection, or a trick of light. But she'd spent years observing people quietly. She'd seen enough in life to know what deception looked like. And this was it. Her heart pounded. She looked around. No one else had noticed. The other servers were busy, and the crowd was too distracted by money and champagne to care about anything else. She took a breath, steeled herself, and approached him. "Sir," she said softly, just as he lifted the glass to his lips. He looked up, surprised. "Yes?" Amara leaned closer, her voice trembling. "There's a drug in your drink," she whispered. For a moment, time froze. His hand stopped mid-air. His blue eyes narrowed slightly. "What did you say?" Amara glanced toward Victoria, who was laughing with a guest but watching them from the corner of her eye. "I saw her drop something in your glass," Amara murmured. "Please don't drink it." Doubt and Danger Alexander set the glass down slowly, his mind spinning. He didn't know who this woman was. For all he knew, she could be lying, seeking attention, or worse, trying to manipulate him. But something in her voice, quiet, honest, terrified, struck him. He studied her, the sweat on her brow, the trembling of her hands. She had nothing to gain from this. He gave a tight nod. "Thank you," he whispered back. Then, without a word, he placed the glass aside, untouched. Victoria glided over moments later, her smile a weapon dressed in lipstick. "Darling, why aren't you drinking? Toast to us." Alexander smiled faintly. "I will, in a minute." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but enough for him to see the flash of irritation she tried to hide. The rest of the night moved in slow motion. Amara went back to work, pretending nothing happened, her heart racing. Alexander, meanwhile, quietly instructed his bodyguard to take the glass to the lab in his office for testing. He didn't mention what he suspected. Not yet. By midnight, the gala ended. Guests trickled out, still laughing, still blinded by champagne and chandeliers. But beneath the surface, something darker was unfolding. The truth in the morning, the next morning, Alexander received the report. His assistant placed the results on his desk without a word. Inside the champagne glass were traces of diazepam, a potent sedative, enough to make someone lose consciousness within minutes. He sat in silence, the paper shaking in his hand. The woman he was planning to marry had tried to drug him. But why? He could have ignored it. Covered it up quietly, confronted her in private. But something in him, something wounded and old, refused to stay silent. He remembered Amara's whisper, the courage it took to speak up. He picked up the phone. "Find her," he said. "The waitress from last night." Two worlds collide. When Amara arrived at the marble office of Ward Industries, she thought she was being fired, or worse, sued. She stood nervously in the lobby, her uniform replaced by a modest blue dress. When Alexander walked in, she almost didn't recognize him without the crowd. He looked tired but lighter, somehow more human. "Amara Jones," he said gently. "Please sit," she hesitated. "Sir, if this is about what happened—" "It's about the truth," he interrupted. "You saved my life last night." Her eyes widened. "So, it was real." He nodded. "The drink was drugged, you were right." Amara covered her mouth, horrified. "Oh my God." He leaned back, studying her. "Why did you tell me? You could have ignored it, pretended not to see." She looked down at her hands. "Because I've seen people get hurt when no one speaks up. My mom used to say, 'Silence helps the cruel, never the kind.'" She smiled sadly. "I just didn't want to be silent." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and disbelief. "I owe you everything," he said quietly. The exposure that evening, Alexander hosted another gathering, smaller, private, exclusive. He invited Victoria, her parents, and a handful of trusted associates. The atmosphere was calm, almost too calm. Victoria arrived radiant as ever, though there was a flicker of unease behind her practiced smile. Halfway through dinner, Alexander stood and raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced. "To truth." Victoria's smile faltered. He nodded toward his assistant, who brought forward the sealed lab report. "Last night I was supposed to drink this champagne," he said, gesturing toward the identical glass now placed before him. "But someone decided I shouldn't." The room went silent. "I had it tested. It contained a sedative, one strong enough to knock someone unconscious." He turned to Victoria, his eyes calm but piercing. "Would you like to tell me why?" Her face drained of color. "Alex, this is insane. Someone's trying to frame me." But he only shook his head. "The cameras caught you, Victoria. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, but it wasn't, was it?" Tears filled her eyes, though they were more fury than regret. "You think I'd hurt you?" "I don't think," he said quietly. "I know." And with that, he handed the report to her father, who looked at it in shock. Within minutes, Victoria stormed out, her reputation crumbling behind her like shattered glass. Aftermath days later, tabloids exploded with headlines. "Billionaire cancels engagement after fiancé's drugging scandal." But Alexander didn't care about the gossip. What haunted him more was the realization that the woman who had saved him was probably back to her ordinary life, unnoticed, uncelebrated. So he found her again. This time, he didn't ask her to come to his office. He went to hers, the small downtown cafe where she now worked. When he walked in, every head turned. Billionaires didn't visit coffee shops on the corner of Elm and Pine. But Alexander did. "Amara," he greeted with a warm smile. She froze mid-pour. "Mr. Ward," he laughed softly. "Please, it's Alex," she wiped her hands nervously. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "I wanted to," he said. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that humanity doesn't come from money or power. It comes from courage." Her cheeks warmed. "I just did what anyone should have done," he smiled. "That's the thing, Amara. Not everyone would have." The offer. He slid a small envelope across the counter. Inside was a scholarship, fully funded, for Amara to attend the university program she had once applied to but couldn't afford. She stared at it in disbelief. I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he said gently. "It's not charity. It's recognition. You saw truth when no one else did. You deserve a future where that kind of vision changes lives." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for speaking up." A year later, Amara stood on a stage at a youth leadership conference. She was no longer the quiet waitress. In the background, she was the keynote speaker, sharing her story about courage, empathy, and integrity. "Sometimes," she told the crowd, "you'll see something wrong and your first instinct will be to stay silent because you're afraid. But silence is a choice, and it's one that helps the wrong side." She looked out into the audience and smiled. Alexander sat in the front row, proud and humble, clapping louder than anyone. After the event, he approached her. "You're incredible," he said. She laughed softly. "You made it possible." He shook his head. "No, Amara, you did." They walked out together, into a sunset that painted the sky gold, the kind of gold that wasn't from money or chandeliers, but from hope. Epilogue. The lesson in time. Their paths intertwined more closely. Not as billionaire and waitress, but as equals. Two people bound by the kind of truth that changes lives. The world remembered the scandal for a few weeks. But the real story, the one that mattered, wasn't about betrayal. It was about bravery. Because that night when Amara whispered the truth, she didn't just save a man from a poisoned drink, she saved him from a poisoned life. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching, seen or unseen, that the smallest act of courage can spark the greatest change. A year and a half later, the city had changed. And so had they. Ward Industries, once known for cold ambition, had begun to stand for something different. Under Alexander's leadership, the company launched new initiatives, scholarships, mentorships, and community programs that gave underrepresented youth a chance to enter the world of technology and business. At the heart of it all was Amara Jones, now Director of Community Impact. She never sought the spotlight, but the light found her anyway. Her authenticity drew people in like gravity. Every week she visited schools and shelters, speaking to young people about courage and moral clarity. "You don't have to be rich to make a difference," she would tell them. "You just have to care enough to act when others won't." Her words carried weight because she had lived them. A moment of reflection, one quiet evening after a long day of meetings, Alexander found her standing on the rooftop terrace of Ward Tower. The city lights stretched below them like stars that had chosen to live on Earth. "You're thinking too hard," he said. Joining her, she smiled without looking away from the skyline. "Old habit." He leaned against the railing beside her. "You've been working non-stop. You built this program from scratch. You should be proud," she chuckled softly. "You sound like my mom." "Smart woman, then," he said gently. For a while they stood in silence. The wind carried the hum of the city, the distant sounds of life. Then Alexander said quietly, "You know, before you warned me that night, I thought I had everything: success, love, security. But the truth is I was surrounded by noise, not meaning. You changed that." Amara turned to him, her expression warm but firm. "No, Alex, you changed that yourself. You chose to believe the truth even when it was painful. That's courage," he smiled. "Maybe we both needed that night to wake up." Their eyes met. No grand gestures, no confessions, just quiet understanding. The kind that feels stronger than any promise. A test of faith. Months later, another storm hit. The media began circulating rumors about Alexander's company. A rival had accused Ward Industries of unethical dealings overseas. Stocks trembled. Investors panicked. Alexander was furious but composed. He knew the accusations were false, but proving it wasn't simple. The press twisted every word. Amara found him one evening, sitting alone in his office, the weight of the world visible in his posture. "Talk to me," she said gently. He sighed. "I worked so hard to make this company stand for something good. Now, they're dragging it through the mud. I can't control what people believe anymore." She sat across from him. "Maybe not, but you can control what you do next. The truth always has a longer life than a lie. It just takes time to breathe." He looked up at her, and in that moment something shifted. Not the kind of change that comes from words alone, but from trust. He nodded slowly. "Then we'll give it time. And truth." Over the next weeks, they worked side by side. Sleepless nights, countless calls, late dinners at the office. Together they gathered evidence, reached out to partners, and spoke publicly about transparency. And when the truth finally came out, that the rival company had fabricated the entire story, Alexander didn't celebrate. He just smiled quietly at Amara and said, "You were right again. Healing and humanity, their bond deepened. Not out of romance alone, but respect. They had walked through fire together and found strength and compassion. Sometimes, after long days, they'd end up back at that same cafe where she once worked. She'd laugh, reminding him how nervous she'd been that first day he walked in. "You looked like you were about to faint," he teased one evening, sipping his coffee. "I was sure you came to sue me," she laughed. "I even practiced my apology in the back room." "Apology?" He grinned. "For saving my life." Her laughter softened. "For speaking up. It's funny, people think courage feels strong, but in that moment I was terrified," he nodded. "That's what makes it real." The cafe owner would sometimes watch them and shake his head with a smile. He didn't see a billionaire and a former waitress. He saw two people whose lives had intertwined through something deeper than luck. The Gala, full circle 2. Years to the day after the night that changed everything, Alexander hosted another gala, but this one was different. The hall wasn't filled with investors or tabloids. Instead, it was alive with teachers, students, social workers, and community leaders. The chandeliers were the same, but the purpose was different, celebrating ordinary heroes who had done extraordinary things. As the evening reached its peak, Alexander took the stage. "2 years ago," he began, "someone whispered a truth that saved my life. Not just from danger, but from blindness. That moment taught me that kindness doesn't whisper. It transforms." He looked toward Amara, sitting in the front row, wearing a simple blue gown, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "This foundation," he continued, "exists because of people like her. People who see what's right and act, even when no one else will. Tonight we honor not wealth or power, but courage, compassion, and truth." The crowd rose in applause. Some with tears in their eyes, Amara stood, humbled, and for a second, their eyes met again. Two souls who had shared the burden of darkness and found light. The walk outside. After the gala ended, they walked out into the night. The city air was cool. The stars hidden behind high-rises, but the moon was bright enough to guide them. "Still not used to applause," Amara murmured, smiling shyly. Alexander chuckled. "You should be. You've earned it." She looked at him. "You turned a painful night into a movement, Alex. That's more than I ever imagined." He shook his head softly. "You gave it meaning." They stopped at the edge of the street, where the soft hum of traffic blended with distant laughter. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I still wonder why I was even there that night. It felt like fate. Or maybe just the right moment." He smiled. "Maybe both. But I'm grateful every day that you were." A pause. Then with gentle sincerity he added, "You changed everything, Amara, for me. For all of this." Her eyes glistened. "We changed it, together." They didn't need grand declarations, just that truth between them. Steady and undeniable. A world-inspired news outlet soon picked up the story of the gala. Not the scandal from the past, but the transformation that followed. Billionaire and former waitress build global kindness initiative. From whisper to movement. How a small act sparked a big change. Across the world, people began sharing their own stories of courage. Moments when they spoke up, helped a stranger, or chose compassion over convenience. In schools, young girls repeated Amara's words. "Silence helps the cruel, never the kind." And somewhere deep down, both Alexander and Amara knew they hadn't just healed their own wounds. They'd created a ripple that would outlive them both. The final scene years later, Amara returned to that same ballroom, now used annually for the Courage Awards. As she stood there, looking at the golden lights, she remembered the first night, the fear, the whisper, the risk. Alexander walked up beside her, silver now streaking his hair. "Thinking about that night?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Always," he nodded. "You know, sometimes I wonder if fate hadn't crossed our paths." She interrupted gently. "Then someone else would have spoken up." "That's what I believe now. There's more good in the world than we see. Sometimes it just needs one voice to start the echo. He smiled, touched by her humility. As the orchestra began to play, they stood side by side, watching a new generation receive awards for acts of courage. A teacher who protected her students during a crisis. A boy who saved a friend from bullying. A nurse who stood up to injustice in her hospital. Amara whispered, almost to herself, "Kindness always wins." Alexander turned to her, his voice low but filled with reverence. "Because people like you remind the world how." The camera flashes faded. The music softened, and for a brief, perfect moment, everything felt still. Two lives intertwined not by wealth or romance alone, but by truth, bravery, and an unshakable belief in humanity. The end final message. In a world that rewards silence and punishes honesty, one whisper can change everything. Courage isn't loud, it's quiet, trembling and real. And sometimes the smallest act of truth becomes the loudest echo of hope. Kindness wins. Courage to speak. Truth matters. The power of one.